everybody. Welcome to the Evangelist Nick Garrett channel. Now you can see I'm wearing my virus protection mask. You know, nobody knew virus protection, like the Italians from the Middle Ages with the bubonic plague. And some of you might look at this mask as kind of just a humorous little joke from a history nerd. Others of you might look at it as an act of civil disobedience to draw attention to just how absurd some of these things are given the climate in our world today. Anyway, this is my new virus mask so that I can remain protected. Ladies and gentlemen, today I've got a spectacular video. In fact, it's a discussion and a discovery that might be the most fascinating one I've made in all these years of study, and I'm really excited to tell you about it. We're going to be wrapping up Book 1 of the Church History by Eusebius of Nicomedia, the last few chapters. If you recall in the last one, we talked about Herod, the Idumean, who was really an Antipater, and ended up being the first foreign king in Judea. Well, today, we're going to take a little bit further of a look into him and touch on the fascinating discovery I made that is totally cool for discussing, and I hope that you guys find it as exciting as I do. Now, okay, so we're on Herod, right? And in the beginning of Matthew, and Eusebius writes about the three Magi from the east making a journey to see Herod. It says this: when Christ was born according to the prophecies in Bethlehem of Judea, at the time indicated, Herod was not a little disturbed by the enquiry of the Magi who came from the east, asking where he who was born King of the Jews was to be found. So what that indicates to us is that the Magi came from the west by following a star. They came from the east by following a star. They traveled a long distance during a time when traveling was not easy, and they went to the king of the area and they said, well, where is he? Expecting that everybody would know. This is a big deal. The King of the Jews is born. The Jewish people in their own tradition have the tradition of a Messiah. Tell us where to go to see him. We followed his star. For they, the Magi, had seen his star, and this was their reason for taking such a long journey. For they earnestly desired to worship the infant as God. That's some pretty ethereal language, and admittedly, the editors don't let us down. They let us know that that was an addition of Eusebius, and it doesn't appear that way in the book of Matthew. But the point is the same. The Magi wanted to go see the boy who would be King of the Jews, the baby. For he, Herod, imagined that his kingdom might be endangered, and he inquired therefore of the doctors of the law who belonged to the Jewish nation where the expected Christ was to be born. When he learned that the prophecy of Micah announced that Bethlehem was to be his birthplace, he commanded in a single edict all the male infants in Bethlehem and all its borders that were 2 years of age or less, according to the time which he had accurately ascertained from the Magi, to be slain, supposing that Jesus, as was indeed likely, would share the same fate as the others of his own age. Now, I'm going to stop there for a second, because if you're thinking about this like I am, a few things should strike you as very interesting. First of all, the Magi come. Herod knows nothing about it. So Herod goes to his experts, the experts of his Jewish religion and culture, and says, hey, tell me where this Jesus is supposed to be born. They didn't go, oh, come on, these Magi are nuts. They have no idea what they're talking about. No, he didn't. He pushed them to tell him what was going on. And they came to him with the prophecy found in the book of Malachi in the Old Testament. So you have Herod, the Jewish doctors, and the Magi, not a single one of them saying, oh, come on, this is bunk, this can't be right, this can't be real. No, they're confirming in the ancient scriptures what is written and what is said and trying to find where it will be. They do find it. They find it in Bethlehem. Of more important note here, Remember that Herod, the Idumean, the Antipater, was the first of the foreign kings, right? So, his three sons, Philip and Herod Antipas and Archelaus, would end up being the next rulers. Although they ruled as a tetrarchy and were never given that title like they once held under the Jewish tradition. Caesar Augustus was the Roman ruler. After him would be Tiberius, and during that, the governorship of Pontius Pilate. My point in saying this is the Jewish tradition was not strong during this time. We often look to 70 AD when the temple was destroyed and say, well, this is when it all started to fall apart. Not true. The birth of the Messiah comes during a time when the first of the foreign kings are ruling in Jerusalem under Roman occupation, and it's about age 30 when Jesus begins teaching, while two high priests are in the temple, Annas and Caiaphas, who weren't Jewish high priests in the line of high priests, but political appointments. This is where the Jewish rulers and the Roman rulers begin interacting in a more political relationship than a religious one. This is a detail that's so important when we look at Christ and the death of Christ. Now, I want to point something out here because this part, before we even go further, got me thinking. Do the Jewish people today still believe a Messiah is coming? If we can read this and see that at the time they didn't doubt this, they questioned this and looked to prophecy just like the early Christians did. The Jewish traditions had died. Foreign traditions were being intermixed in what was the Jewish tradition. Can you start to see this snowball effect happening? So I took the time to research the Jewish concepts of the Messiah today. And I want to give credit to where it comes from. I looked at several sources, but the most concise appeared to be from a Rabbi Mordecai Becker, The Messiah in Judaism. And this is from a YouTube channel that makes short Jewish and Israeli films. Now, they view Mashiach as a time of redemption. There's these two things that kind of ebb and flow, the idea of an actual person Messiah and Mashiach as the idea of redemption, a messianic age that will come. Now, number one, and all his teachings come from Maimonides, which I wrote about in my first big book, Just Tell Me the Truth About Christianity. He is the kind of go-to historian for work from this early era. So he says that the concept of a time where the world will achieve an ideal state will appear, according to the sages, when they look at Genesis 1:1, because it indicates a beginning, right? We have the Berach Elohim bara, right? God creates in the beginning God started. In the beginning God creates, and the implication is that God creates things with a purpose, and it represents the beginning of a process, right? The world is a beginning, and there is an end to this process, right? The end to this process comes under belief in Mashiach, but it doesn't just involve belief in redemption in God, but also you have to believe in the Jewish people and in humanity. So right away we've got a problem here looking at this in the Christian worldview, right? Because in the Christian worldview, man is wicked. The heart is wicked. We follow the heart, we're led to sin, right? The whole point of the Messiah that was missed, if they were looking at it in this context, this age of redemption and there will be closure, this is works-based. The people have to somehow evolve to this point where they are worthy for Jesus to come. But remember, the whole point that Jesus even teaches when he's here, if you look at books like Hebrews, there's nothing you can do. You're sinful. You're not going to make it. The proof of the Old Testament is that humanity is not going to arbitrarily change itself to better morals and better ethics. Jesus died as a substitutionary atonement. And, speaking of Judaism during this time, remember the sacrificial system is laid out. You had grain offerings, you had offerings of small birds and animals, you had offerings of the perfect red heifer, the sheep. The family would go to the temple once a year, pay the priest would take the animal, split the blood would fall on the altar, and that physical blood would cover the sins of that family for a year. But what does the book of Hebrews teach us? The book of Hebrews teaches us that Jesus Christ is the once and for all sacrifice. How do you miss this? Your own Jewish doctors serving the foreign king Herod did not discount what the Magi were saying. They studied it with them and said, oh yeah, we can see from the book of Malachi, it must be Bethlehem. That's the place. That's what it says. And then we have the Old Testament reference, right, to Bethlehem. Melchizedek, Melchizedek, the king of peace in the city of bread. Bethlehem, city of bread. Fascinating, right? Anyway, so to believe in the Mashiach in the modern Jewish sense, you're not just believing in redemption and God, but you're believing in the Jewish people and in humanity. One has to believe human beings are capable of redemption, and this is taught by Maimonides, the great Jewish scholar, so we can see a clear deviation from Christian thought there. According to Maimonides, the prophet spoke to the human's ability to get better and therefore come around to redemption. But this isn't what we see in our Old Testament, is it? Maybe. I mean, I guess you could say, all right, well, over time, the people got back in line with God's law, and then they were rewarded and restored. But wasn't the premise that over and over and over again this happened? And that, what does Paul tell us? The whole point was to show us that we could not follow the law, that we needed some type of intervention, divine intervention, because regardless of the countless times that these laws had been tried, we fell short every time. Humanity did. Now, the Messiah, according to modern Judaism, at least this particular rabbi, does not have to be miraculous. Will be a human, descended from David, but not necessarily miraculous. No changes in the laws of biology or physics, for example. A change will take place not in our human nature, but in a better approach to our morality, our ethics, and spirituality. This sounds a heck of a lot like secularism to me, and I don't mean any offense, but it sounds like moral relativism, secularism, naturalism. It doesn't sound like a religion that pays obeisance to a perfect and holy God. And I don't mean offense. I can't expect that I've looked at one or two sources describing modern Judaism and that this one individual speaks for the whole of the religion. I mean, look at Christianity. I could look up a doctrinal question and get 500 different answers. So don't take the speaking of this one Rabbi Belcher as gospel, forgive the pun, because we're going to find different views across the gambit. But don't you wonder, how is it that they were collaborating, their traditions and systems started to fall away as the Romans gained power in that region. The Messiah comes up. The Messiah says, I'm here. This is not about restoring the kingdom here, like the Zealots thought, right? You had different groups of Zealots, and all of them knew the Messiah was coming. They just had different ideas about what he was going to do. The Zealots said, let's gather swords, hide them underground, because he's going to come, and we're going to take back Palestine. That's not what happened. You had Pharisees and Sadducees, one group believing that it has to do with being taken up and the afterlife, and the other saying, no, the afterlife has nothing to do with this. But it was a spiritual rebirth with a once and for all sacrifice, ending the Jewish sacrificial system, overcoming death, showing the way to heaven, not only for the Jews, but for the Gentiles too. In fact, what were the very first arguments they had? We see it in Acts chapter 15. Circumcision was symbolic. The Jews followed it literally. Are we to follow it too? Or is it spiritual circumcision? The Jerusalem Council, correct? Anyway, there's more. So for the modern Jewish Rabbi Belcher, part of redemption will be the gathering of the Jews. They were scattered for about, and over the last 100 years, they've been returning to Israel. All right, we know this, right? The map in the wake of the world wars put Israel back in place in Palestine, where Muslims had largely lived since the conquests during the early 7th century, the early 600s, when in that 100-year period, Islam expanded to almost half the globe of the time, right? Jews from Yemen, New Zealand, Ethiopia, Australia, Brazil, all moving to Israel still today, right? Mass migrations there. We have in our prophecy that eventually their temple will be rebuilt, these types of things. And the belief is that this is guided by divine providence, right? That God is the one who is guiding this return. And this will lead toward this redemption that humans will somehow bring about themselves. This is where it's just such a split from Christianity that it's hard to work with, right? It leads me to this simple conclusion. They missed the Messiah when he was here. You know, one of my things I love to do is watch Christian testimonies on YouTube. And some of my favorite ones come from wonderful Jewish people. And if you happen to be a Jew and a practicing Jew, God bless you. I don't hold any offense toward you. This is a discussion simply for edification. The videos I love, though, are the ones where somebody comes across Isaiah 53. A Jewish person comes across Isaiah 53. The prophecy about Jesus Christ. And they say, oh, with the sacrificial system in mind, the Jewish sacrificial system, I get it. Somebody had to die. Talk about powerful. Powerful. And there are so many coming to Christ that feel led astray. Like, why didn't we learn about this? Why did we get the Talmud, which simply discredits this man in so many negative ways? So many horrible things said about him in the Talmud. Well, why? If he was just a fly-by-night person who wasn't really the Messiah, why give that effort to it? It tells more that he's in there and criticized than if you hadn't have said anything at all. If you haven't read some of the passages about Jesus Christ in the Talmud, I highly recommend that you do so. So in the Jewish community, there is optimism for this plan of redemption. And they are God's children too. And we are grafted into the tree and vine with them. They are our brothers. There is a theology or a doctrine. Some believe that we are, we are the Jews, right? Once we become saved, born again in Jesus Christ, that we are the Jews. And there is another contrary theology that says, no, there's no Jew or Gentile anymore. We are all just the bride, right, of Christ once we become saved. Anyway, this is a fascinating topic, and I had never thought of it, so hopefully you enjoyed hearing about it as much as I did reading it. Let me give you a brief catch-up, because, friends, we have gotten through Book 1 of the Church History by Eusebius of Nicomedia. We learned about the high priest under the high priest of the Jews under whom Christ taught. We have one chapter on John the Baptist and an interesting chapter on the disciples that names a lot of the 70, which I thought was cool in conjunction with Luke. We know he sent 70 out 2 by 2, but Eusebius tries to piece together a list as best he can. And some of these names are important to church history, so that might be fun to look over. We have a narrative concerning the Prince of Edessa, and that's going to be the next video, where we look at an example of an early church forgery, which Eusebius had no way of knowing was a forgery, and he gives it to us, but I want to share how the editors know and how they keep us on the straight and narrow when we're studying objective primary sources. Ladies and gentlemen, God bless you, and as always, may your work today bear fruit. If you'd like to purchase a book I've written, you can visit www.amazon.com/author/nicholasdgarrett. You can purchase one of the books from the Just Tell Me the Truth About Christianity series, or my nonfiction work, Shipwrecked in the Land of King Tobacco, the first Washington family immigrant to America. A great story that somehow in the breadth of work about George Washington had not been covered. His great-grandfather John settled in Virginia after a shipwreck, and it's a really great story. You can also go to the Teespring store, get a t-shirt. I'm going to put some new designs up here pretty soon. And if anything, as always, please share the video on your Facebook, your social medias. That probably helps more than anything nowadays. But you can like, comment, subscribe, share. I always look forward to hearing what you have to say, and it motivates me. So thank you and love you guys. Talk to you next time. Bye.